Good evening, everyone. My name is Margaret Home, and this January, this begins the fourth year that our organization, First Things First Okanagan, has been hosting these monthly online webinars. We try to present different perspectives on climate solutions for our communities. And we're always looking for new speakers and ideas. So if you have a topic that you would like to see us pursue, please do send us a note. We'd love to pursue it. We're grateful to live on land that is the traditional and unceded territory of the Seal First Nations who have been living in the Okanagan for thousands of years. And as part of the Indigenous land acknowledgement, we always try to suggest opportunities for people to deepen their understanding of First Nations values for the land and values for the future. Melina Labukan Massimo is Lubukan Cree. She's co-founder of Indigenous Climate Action. She's also a research fellow with the David Suzuki Foundation. So next week, she and David Suzuki are having a fireside chat next Wednesday, and they're going to be discussing the Just Transition Guide, which is newly published, as you can see, Indigenous-led pathways for climate equitable solutions. And they have many case studies in this guide that will allow people to see what's going on across Canada. First Nations that are moving towards independence for their energy and independence for their own communities. So we're going to put in the chat, we'll put a link to the webinar that they're offering next Wednesday, and also a link to the transition guide, which you can just take a look at and see what's going on across Canada. Now I'd like to turn things over to Sue Kirschman, another board member, to introduce tonight's speaker.
I'll just unmute myself. Thanks, Margaret, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Communities are very much at the center of climate change. It's where we live that we have to cope with smoke from wildfires, try to stay cool during heat domes, and try to keep warm during deep freezes like the last 2 weeks ago. We need to fireproof our properties because of wildfire risk, and we have to deal with inflated prices because of weather-related crop failures and supply chain disruptions, like happened during the catastrophic Fraser Valley floods. Communities are also the first line of defense against climate change, and through good planning and appropriate bylaws, municipalities can play a big role in reducing emissions and protecting citizens. For example, through emergency preparedness programs, building codes that favor construction of low-carbon buildings with high-efficiency heating and cooling systems, policies that protect the local environment and promote green spaces and trees for shade, and infrastructure that makes it easier for us to bike and walk. Most important, though, is a strong sense of community. When neighbors look out for each other, no one gets forgotten during an emergency, as sadly did happen during the 2021 heat dome. When citizens form organized groups, they can advocate for positive change and help build communities that are not only climate resilient, but are also great places to live. So tonight, we're going to learn about how to mobilize people and to build such community groups. Our presenter is Norm van Eeden Petersman. He's the Director of Membership and Development for Strong Towns, which is a member-supported nonprofit organization that advocates for a new approach to how we build lasting prosperity in communities right across North America. Norm lives in the Lower Mainland in Delta, and he leads the housing advocacy group called Deltans for People-Oriented Places, a group that is really active in mobilizing people to improve how the city of Delta makes land use and housing decisions. Norm's experience in community building and advocacy is extensive. He's had stints in communications in Surrey with Mayor Diane Watt's office and with federal infrastructure programs in Ottawa. He also has been a pastor for over 10 years, and he travels widely to speak about the Strong Towns approach and how to mobilize communities to change in ways that are increasingly inclusive and provide for lasting prosperity. We're really happy to have you here tonight, Norm. Thanks for coming. And before I turn it over to you, just a reminder that we're going to have a moderated Q&A after the presentation. So if anybody has any questions, just please type them into the chat. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Norm.
Thank you so much, Sue, and to Lori and to everyone that's joined under the banner of the First Things First Okanagan group. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share some of the insights that we as an organization, the Strong Towns organization, can really share with you as a result of trying to work with over nearly 200 groups that are currently active across North America, as well as another 870 that are in the works of forming in various communities across North America, trying to grapple with the challenges that we're facing in our community. And so it's good to be with you. I want to present these ideas as food for thought, to provide you with some considerations of things that perhaps you've been hearing and hearing and hearing over the years, and yet maybe tonight is the night where you're like, hey, this is really exciting, or I want to take on a new challenge, take on a new opportunity in the midst of your circumstances. And so it's awesome to be with you, and I am excited to talk to you tonight about what it takes to mobilize your community, and then in the Q&A time to really sort of take an opportunity to hone in on some of the things that you are particularly facing in Penticton, and take an opportunity to look at those things together and really prompt those types of questions that we can ask ourselves. What role can I play? What does it take for me to find some small measure of an opportunity in my place? What can I do at the neighborhood level, at the block level, even as a neighbor to another person, to really connect with them and help them? And so what I wanted to start with is the idea of time travel. In time travel, I went and read, well, what are the rules for time travel? And one of the rules is you must be very, 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 very careful about making any changes if you go back in time. In fact, as Ian LaHaye, a sci-fi author, said, your traveler must in no way be connected to the facts he or she is trying to change. Otherwise, you make a mess of everything. But it's in this context that I had a great conversation with a city manager in Selkirk, Manitoba. And he said, Norm, I think of my work as a city manager as being equivalent to that of a time traveler. As I go back, in a sense, into my present time, if I make a small change, a small improvement, a modest increase of something good, or a taking away of something that is harmful or negative, he said the impact is probably something that I will only begin to see the beginnings of in my lifetime. But the truth is, if we play it out in our minds, we realize, like, even a modest change, a small improvement is going to make a significant difference down the road. And so they were profiled in the Winnipeg Free Press, their city, but particularly the work that Dwayne Nickel was doing. And I love this headline: when boring is a thrill. Perhaps you're one of those people that people say, like, hey, how did you get so worked up about these issues? You say, because it matters and it's interesting. And they might join you for the first part, but they really kind of wonder about the latter part, that it's interesting, but it truly is when we become seized with the idea that we can together, and also with our own individual agency, be able to work towards building prosperity, building the success, building opportunities for each other within a planning or within a healthy community. I love the idea of coming onto the same page to plan for a healthy community and to get people excited about it. This does not mean that Selkirk, as many other communities across Canada are faced with this, is not immune to criticisms, to challenges that they face. And yet, one of the things that I think is so impactful is the idea that if we pursue a path of continual sort of incremental improvements of the place that we live, or to quote Chuck Marone, the founder of Strong Towns, if we love our place, it will love us back. There are so many things that are crying out for our attention. And so tonight I want to think through, what does it take as you observe things, as you note things in your community, maybe that are boring to most people and yet are significant in your own life as well as in the lives of others. What are the things that you can do to begin to rally a group and strengthen existing organizations, work within an organization like First Things First, but also bridge divides perhaps that have been building, or create new bonds between groups and individuals that we can see bear good fruit in the years to come. And so when we think of it, what is it that we would recommend? What is it that we always say to start with? Is to change a community, you need to start at the bottom and work in increments. And by increments, we mean sort of the next littlest things, each small stage. Perhaps if you've encountered a youth activist, and I'm not painting with a too broad a brush because I'm reflecting particularly my own experience. I thought, hey, if I just pay some attention to an issue and make it myself really clear, then everything's going to change. And the challenge and the frustration came from what I later perceived to be overreach, trying to say, I'm going for the big thing, and yet really failing to actually see that make any measurable success, any measurable improvement, in part because the method of slowly changing things requires sort of an enduring patience that can be really challenging. In our context as the Strong Towns organization, we are committed to changing the development pattern of cities and towns across North America. The way that cities and towns are developing ever since the Second World War has shifted dramatically from the way that our ancestors, through thousands and thousands of years of building successful human habitat, in those thousands of years, many lessons were learned that subsequent after the Second World War, in what we call the suburban experiment, those lessons were sidelined as being of old ways, and the new modern march of progress would be the only thing that would be necessary. We could do everything differently and do a continent-wide experiment in community building that had taken methods that had never been tried before, try it all at once on a continent-wide scale. And as if you want to spend some time in the Strong Towns material, you'll see the way that we talk about this, that we are coming up on the real impacts of this experiment that has failed and is continuing to fail our communities. But against that massive backdrop of trying to change everything, the Strong Towns approach and what I think is really, even if you said, hey, I don't care about Strong Towns, I just want to think like, how do I mobilize people within my community? Critical in this is identifying what are the small increments that you can take. What are the little movements that can happen towards advancing a project? Sometimes it's a very humble thing, getting a few people together to sweep and clean up a bike lane so that way it's more passable. Sometimes it's about making sure that if there's obstructions in the path, that those things get cleared. It's the things that we often describe as just being a good citizen, but that work of being a good citizen actually has a cumulative benefit that benefits your whole community as you do those small things, improving people's lives. You know, the whole thing of just even smiling at someone and lightening their day just a little bit. But then as you do that, you begin to pick up some speed. You begin to pick up some confidence. You begin to find allies in this. And that is where we see this happening. We have what I'll describe later is our local conversation program. As I mentioned, it's almost 200 groups right now, but another 870 that are in the works where there's like, hey, we want to talk about these issues that really matter in our community. What do we do? And we're giving them guides. And the core of that guidance is to start small, start at the bottom, work in increments. And I mentioned, you know, the Strong Towns approach, the development pattern that has been in place really since the 1960s, but even before that in sort of its antecedents in the 50s and the 40s. And so I say that has an 80-year head start on me. And so I'm going to spot myself at least 40 years before I feel like I've been so defeated and so discouraged that I just can't keep going at it. That long view, that enduring patience, even as we address very urgent, immediate needs in the context of climate action, in the context of continuing to grapple with really big challenges on a daily basis that some people face as they navigate their community, as they have to pass through parts of the community and feel that they're doing so in a way that's not dignified for them because there's no safe street for them to walk on, or there's no path for them to be able to use to connect to the places that they go to shop or to work or to habitate, to spend time with loved ones. In all of these settings, those things really matter, and there's an urgency to them, but the work of changing them should be something that is really rooted in a deep sense of an enduring sort of long game, a persistent pursuit of what we want to see happen as we go at it. We need to inoculate ourselves against impatience and frustration and discouragement. And it doesn't mean that it's every day. Right now, it's the middle of sad season for me, seasonal affective disorder in the Lower Mainland. And so I've got my mood light. I've got that in order to help my body. But there's other times where I need to do that just to help equip my mind, equip my heart for this tough, challenging work of showing up at a public hearing in Delta and hearing someone say, "Oh, renters just bring crime. I don't want any. I don't want any renters." Or, "We have enough people. I like where my house is at. I don't want anybody else to move here." Other people don't have homes. That's not our problem. All of these things that really break our hearts really cause us to question, like, who is it that is able to walk through life this way? We feel their burden almost more than they feel, and yet in that setting, we have to have this long, deep well of patience and endurance that helps us in this. Now, that's a lot of personal sort of building. But what do we do as we come together with a group? We do so with the confidence that we do know our community's needs and resources better than anyone else, than those that are outside of our community. We can learn from a lot of people. We can learn from what a lot of other places are doing. But a key part of it is asking one another, where are you struggling? What is it the thing that you're faced with? In the work that I do, oh, I lost that slide. In the work that I do for Strong Towns, one of the things that I do at every new member orientation session is I ask, what is the problem that you feel compelled to address in your community? And it's a different way of framing it. And it's a helpful way for each person when they sort of kind of think about it and they're like, oh, yeah, there is a problem or there's a challenge that they feel compelled to address in their community. And that emerges out of the deep, deep experiential observation of that need in action, in activity in their lives. Oftentimes it's out of a concern for others, out of a concern for future generations. And it's in that setting that we can then say, what can we do here to be able to address these things with the resources that we have at hand? Not waiting for that help to come from afar, but rather to take up the challenge immediately in our place. Now, this is the challenge that we face in a world that wants everything to be done quickly, done all at once, and done to a finished state. Strong Town's approach is that we need incremental change that builds capacity. And one of the reasons why we stress this is because it otherwise exposes us to exorbitant risk. Increments are steps along the way towards your goal, but what it allows you to do is to calibrate, to adjust, to iterate on what's taking place. One of the big challenges that we have in our modern system of city planning, of government spending, of all of the different methods that are being used is often that there's this sense of we need to go big. Is it Daniel Kahneman who said, dream big dreams, and there's sort of this idea, or no, make big plans, dream big dreams. I'm butchering it a little bit, but it's the idea that we need to have this big, grand, ambitious scheme and sort of keep pushing for that and make big steps forward. And one of the things that we've said is there's a lot of risk in doing that. What if you get it wrong? What if you miss the mark by not just a millimeter, but by a mile? How do we actually, as we go along, learn from what's taking place, see how people are reacting to what's happening, and the people who do that best are you in your place. If a city is rolling out a new roadway feature to be able to provide more sidewalk space by using fresh cones and paint and things like that in order to narrow the roadway, and say they don't get the geometry just right, and it's actually made it a little bit more dangerous for pedestrians. Do we actually then decry that the municipality just can't get anything right, or do we actually embrace the fact that they've acknowledged a failure, they know where they've missed a mark? The city of Winnipeg, for example, they installed public washroom facilities for members of the community who were going about their regular work and regular day lives, but also those that were struggling with not having access to adequate housing. And in that context, they had a series of portable sort of setups, as well as a more permanent feature. And after a while, because of open drug use and many of the associations that came with illicit activities taking place in these portable areas, the realization was we can't keep going down that path. Now, the trouble was many people said, look, what are we doing? We've wasted the money. Rather than saying, look, we've found what does not work. Now we can iterate on that, identify what works. The core thing with the washroom facilities in their community was that the area needed to be staffed. And when it was staffed by resource workers, not by police or security guards, but participants within the space of healing, within the space of providing care, it was in those supportive contexts that there was virtually no issues with respect to the access to these facilities, but also the proper use of them. And so it's in that setting that we often say we need to be constantly trying to calibrate what we're doing. Learn, hey, if we try something with paint, with some straw bales, to be able to reconfigure a road or create a curb bump out, or to create a temporary bike lane in front of a elementary school or whatever that looks like, to first test it, to first try it, and to do so gladly, willingly, almost mischievously, and just keep iterating on those things and find ways to build by increments, so that we guard ourselves against being exposed to exorbitant risk that comes from going all in on one approach and then struggling if it fails, or struggling if it does not work. For example, we see our municipalities often say, hey, we've got traffic congestion, so why don't we widen all of the roads and add interchanges and throw millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, into highway expansions and road expansions. And then it doesn't work, but so much money has been committed to it that the problem has just persisted. And now the challenge is like, that money is gone. We have a deeper liability hole that we've dug for ourselves, and we still have the problem that we were trying to address, rather than trying smaller, more modest, incremental things along the way. This applies for individuals. This applies for groups. It applies for municipalities. It's practical wisdom that we are constantly encouraging people to use. And so, if we start with ourselves and we start at the bottom and we work in increments, then the next thing that we do is we work to build something that we love. Whether that's a strong town in line with where Strong Towns as an organization sort of has an approach and a message, or just being a stronger place, a more healthy, more vibrant place. Working together in increments is how you become a stronger community. This is where we can ask ourselves again, what problem do you feel compelled to address where you live? For me, what this looked like in my community was, I noticed that I didn't know my neighbors very well. I'd moved to Delta in 2019. Then a global pandemic came and disrupted a lot of things. And one of the consequences is that we were spending more time outside in our front yard, and I put our picnic table up front. And so then we had an opportunity as people would walk by, because people were out on the walking a little bit more. It was like, hey, perfect. This is one way that we got to meet people. But then what we realized in 2022 was, why don't we do a block party? Which was the same thing we'd said in 2021 and in 2020 and even in 2019 when we had just moved in. But what happened? This is so common, isn't it? That we have an idea, we know it's a good thing to do, but then we pause, we wait, we wonder, hey, maybe somebody else will do it. And so one of the things that happened is in I think it was late or middle of August, I created a little pamphlet that said, hey, we're going to host a barbecue just in the front of the street. Don't tell the fire department. We didn't get a permit. We didn't do that stuff. We just said, we're just doing neighborly things. But then I had designed it and it sat there. And then I hit print. And then all of a sudden I had 60 of these little flyers. And I was like, well, I guess I got to just deliver them. I delivered them, and now it was in the middle of the heat dome that we had. It was wickedly wild. The weather was wild, but people showed up. We had 49 people show up, and they said, we haven't had an event like this since this subdivision was created. There were elderly members of the community that came shuffling over. Two of the members in particular were very memorable. He was walking with a walker, and she was walking with him, and she relayed the conversation that happened at their front door when she said, hey, Les, I'm going, and you don't have to come, but I'm going to go because I think this is good. And so he had come. Well, he sat on his walker, holding court with all of the neighbors, sharing stories, telling everybody about what had taken place. And those are the types of things that we can do sometimes just by compelling ourselves to overcome those early obstacles. Oh man, it sounds complicated. It sounds difficult. Actually, it wasn't that difficult. And sometimes it takes just the realization, I've hit print, or I've committed myself in some small way. I may as well see this thing through. And the truth is, awesome things can emerge when you begin to do this. We've hosted another block party. We're going to do this again. We want to make it a regular feature, try to find something we can do in the spring when everybody's hearts are glowing because spring has finally arrived. Do things together and continue to build a community in this way. Along those lines, one of the things that I wanted to just briefly introduce, I know I'm at about 20 minutes, so about 10 minutes to go, is the idea of the ladder of engagement. And this was my brother-in-law in Winnipeg wrote an article for us, What to Do When Your City Won't Listen to Reason. I would say you can extend this, what to do when the United Nations or the international economic community won't listen to reason, or national government or the provincial government or your local government or even your neighbor or your friend. What to do in this setting. His advice and his guidance, having been a community activist where he lives as well, is to really think of it in the context of a ladder of engagement where you need to in order to stay engaged, to stay in the game, to stay in continuing to participate, to say, where will I find a win, some small opportunity? For me, that was hosting a block party. It was amazing how much that helped me to just feel a deep sense of conviction that I was doing something great. But within this ladder of engagement, from a neighbor, your neighbors immediately around you, your block where you live, your neighborhood where you are, your city, and then your region, and then the province and the country. The guidance is to think of it in the terms of various gates. Is there something that you can do at amongst your neighbors to help build community or address a challenge that you face? Is there, rather than skipping immediately over to the city or out to the region or up to the province, is there something that you can do? Then consider, is there something you can do at the block level? Block parties are great for this, but it can also be, putting out a planter of beautiful flowers at the entrance, sort of if there's a natural sort of movement point where people pass, come and go, or a little whimsical sign, or whatever that is, or something that helps your neighbors, or something that helps feed their or give water to their dogs, or whatever that looks like. Small tokens, but also things that give you an opportunity to feel a sense that you've done something and that you've won something. At the neighborhood level, what does that look like for you? And then at the city level, and the key is, as you build up this capacity, this muscle memory of doing things in these ways, what happens when you hit a wall with your city, or you hit a wall with your region, or you hit a wall with a province, is you just come back down the ladder of engagement one step, or maybe two steps, to find something where you can then generate a win, generate an opportunity where you're like, I've met somebody, we're going to do something together. I've had allies here. I'm in South Delta. I've had somebody up in North Delta. We were like, okay, we need to get the city to abolish parking requirements. The parking, people should have parking, but it shouldn't be required in such a strict, rigorous way that our city currently requires it. Trouble is, we had no basis from which to launch such a program, such an initiative. We needed to basically build up to that point. And so facing a bit of that frustration meant that we actually had to basically take it back down, try to focus at the neighborhood level, try to identify what we could do to help for us, Ladner Village, to be modify some of its planning regulations in order to be able to have more good things in within the Ladner Village. And it was interesting as you think of this ladder of engagement. I guess the challenge, especially for a group like First Things First Okanagan, the actions that you're engaged in is a lot of the attention and energy can really go into what's happening at the provincial level or the country level. And one of the challenges I would give for you this evening is, what are the things that you can perhaps do sometimes to help yourself to just feel encouraged, maybe at the city level, or at the neighborhood level, or at the block level, or even just amongst your neighbors. And doing so, we find, as we talk with local advocates and local heroes across the United States and Canada, is that this is actually the pattern that we see all the time in the folks that are doing these types of things. They don't shoot for the stars. They just shoot right next door. Or shoot's a bad metaphor. They use the skills that they have just to connect locally and really engage in that way. And so another guidance, or a piece of guidance, and I see this already in the material that I'm reading in First Things First and other places, is to be for something positive. This a person pictured on the screen was on the Strong Towns podcast, The Bottom Up Revolution, and he said, my community in Bothell, Washington, was roiled with people that were so upset at all this change that's happening, all this new housing. Oh, it's terrible. He posted in the group. He said, hey, I actually don't mind what's happening. And if anybody else is interested, why don't we meet up for a cup of coffee and we'll talk about like the good things that are happening. And out of that, a group emerged in Bothell, Washington of Bothelites for people-oriented places, from which Deltons for people-oriented places took the name quite gladly. And they really were focused. They said, we have a vision for a good life in a prospering place. And we want to be for something rather than just against something. And that generates greater enthusiasm, greater longevity. At times, the challenge is that a lot of the heat comes from people that are against something. They feel this deep sense of fear or frustration, and so they will use a lot of energy. And the challenge will be that you probably know this too in your life. When you're for something, sometimes you can be very casually for something, passively for something, just like glad that something is happening, but not actually taking into account the need that sometimes you need to speak up. Say, I love what's happening in our city, or I love what's taking place in my community. I celebrate these things and want to see them perhaps go a little bit further. There can be that guidance. Hey, let's continue it towards a better vision, but also celebrating those things. Does your council member know that you love Penticton or the Okanagan or the area that you're calling in from today? And so we see this with our Strong Towns groups. They are asking, "Hey, how do we support small business, or how do we connect together?" They post meeting times and just see who shows up. And I love the fact that in Penticton that's an opportunity, using Zoom as a great tool, doing those types of things, doing this across more and more communities. I think is essential in a time where we're seeing greater fragmentation, a lot of frustration, people that are living a lot of their lives online and being fueled by the methods and the madness of online discourse. And I think it's so critical at these times for us to be able to be together, tackle tough challenges together, but to do so with a spirit of really have a vision of what we are for, what we desire to see within our places. Very briefly, I'm going to touch on features of successful local groups that we are seeing in our sample size of, well, it's 860 when I prepared the slide. Now we're almost up to 1,000 local conversation groups that are either in formation or are currently active. And this is also from Hari Han. If you ever want to check out some academic work on it, how organizations develop, sorry, activists, is a wonderful text on this front as well, really deep. But part of it is it's got to be more than a lone wolf. So on whatever issue it is, and always figure out, how do you broaden the bench? How do you involve more people? How do you bring more people into the conversation? Creating little task forces or working groups within an organization to be able to say, hey, you're really passionate about this. Why don't you team up with these people and go work on this? Making sure that it's not just a lone wolf, which is not a challenge in Penticton, but it can be a challenge in other communities where people try to go it alone and then quickly burn out. And so successful teams expand the team. They make connections by identifying the many teams in your community, and actually ask the question at times, how can I be an ambassador of the things I'm passionate about within those groups without hijacking them, but at the same time participating in good faith in other groups, other organizations, while simultaneously bringing your values into those places, bringing the things that you celebrate as well as the things that you are contending for. And so this is a key thing, tying those warmer connections, bringing those connections together. Another thing is always to do something together. You'll feel more galvanized, more invested once you have an opportunity to take this on. It is amazing to see the difference in engagement levels between the groups that we have. Some Strong Towns local conversations that meet exclusively on Facebook and sometimes on Zoom, but they've never met in person. They've not had an opportunity to do something together, host an event, share something with neighbors, do whatever that is. And the challenge is that they tend to wither away. Whereas those groups that do something together, participate in rallies, provide seating by building benches, bus stops, raising funds to plant trees, doing a walk audit, all of these things are fantastic opportunities to do together. Another challenge in our very people are losing the ability, it seems, to be able to talk together. And so one of the things we always say is never attack people. You can attack actions. If someone is persisting down a path that is really destructive, you can say that's not a good action for you to be taking, but don't make it personal. We know this, but it's always worth repeating. Don't impugn other people's motives or assume that you know what their motives are. Try to build, instead of a straw man of their position, a steel man, and then engage with that steel man as well as you can in order to really have constructive dialogue together. Another key element of local successful groups is they celebrate successes, and they do so in an expansive way. I would say, especially with local officials, make it seem like it was their idea the whole time, even if they're Johnny come lately, even if they had virtually nothing to do. If you as a group got a bunch of street trees planted and worked with a bunch of local activists, and then you invite a local councillor to show up, make sure that they are welcomed and invited and celebrated just for being there. I'm saying that be as gracious and welcoming to your local council member as you would be to anybody else, even if you're preparing to endorse their opponent in the next election. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them on everything, but find ways to celebrate their success because it's part of your success as well. For your group to be our group, not my group, not something that I hold on to, but something that we share in common and that we have achieved together as well. Another thing is always to be in the process of mobilizing and influencing public officials. I love a lot of what I'm seeing in what Lori was describing of what First Things First is doing, as well as other groups that we know of. But some of it is just sharing an article. That's a little bit of how I got my start in my community. Was I noticed, hey, we were having real heated discussions about parking in Steveston when I was living in Richmond. And so I shared an article about parking reform with one of the local city councilors, and she said, "Hey, this is interesting." And one of the things I did, and this is an encouragement for you all, whenever you engage with a public official, they tend to be quite busy. In that setting, to just send them a link to be like, "You should watch this," is often not going to work. But when you say, "I know that we're dealing with this problem. Here's a snippet, or here's a segment, here's sort of a juicy bit that should get your attention. Like, this is something I think that you would find to be really helpful in your work." And then say, "And I would love to follow it up with a conversation." It's amazing how many people are receptive to that, open to that. And a key thing as well, I would suggest always when you're trying to work with public officials, help them be more efficient by saying, "Hey, not only I will meet with you, I'll bring somebody along." That way you're meeting with 2 constituents or 3. You're doing that in a way that you actually say there's going to be good in return on the investment of your time in doing this, and get to know these things and work at this. It's not it's not sort of like, horse whispering, but there's an art to it, and you can learn and refine your abilities in these areas, and groups do this effectively together. And so these, again, are the 6 features that we've identified of successful local groups: having multiple leaders, so that it's not resting on anyone's shoulders, being connected to broader networks, and really being good participants in the community sort of ecosphere, doing things together, deliberately focusing on issues in a really successful way, or pardon me, in a way that's very thoughtful, in a way that's very gracious, celebrating successes together, and then offering value as a generous partner for local officials. As I said at the beginning, when you love your place, it will love you back. It is one of those things. As you invest more deeply in your community, you will find that increasingly it becomes just a more beloved part of your life. You can feel a deeper affection to the place that you live, even if there are some customers or some individuals, some characters within your community that you find hard to love. You can love your place. You can contend for it in a gracious, loving way, and it will reap so many rewards for you. And so one of the books that I would recommend to you is the book Reclaiming Your Community by Majora Carter. I love the slogan that she used, or the subtitle: "You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one." Would highly recommend this book to you. Majora was our keynote speaker at the Strong Towns National Gathering, and just her story is amazing, and the book is fantastic as well. Um, Also, if you're interested, I will share it in the chat as well. There's more resources from tonight's talk that are available. I kind of created a collection of different resources that we have: some articles, some videos, some podcasts, and that will be available there. You can go directly to the QR code. I think we'll share the slides afterwards as well. But thank you so much for this opportunity to share just some descriptions of what it takes to mobilize your community to become a stronger community. And I would be happy to take questions and share this time with you further. So.
Norm, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. I think we do have a couple of questions in the chat, and then maybe we'll open it up. But first of all, somebody asked, what does Strong Towns do? How do they promote meetings? I think perhaps a little bit more orientation into what Strong Towns does and maybe does not do. You don't actually help different groups with their concerns. But anyway, you take it away.
Yeah. So broadly, Strong Towns is characterized in really 2 ways. Strong Towns is a movement of people that are really passionate to say we need to address what we're doing in our current pattern of development. We need to address all the decisions that we're making with land use, with housing, with community building, with economic development, all of these different threads that really are critical together. And so there's a wide network of people that are really passionate about these ideas and trying to come at this from a fresh or a distinctive way. Within that context, Strong Towns as an organization is a media advocacy organization we're a nonprofit advocacy organization, to say, but we chiefly use media, so our podcasts, our videos, our articles, our courses that we put together to try to persuade people to consider alternatives, to make a difference in their community, and really equip activists in their communities, whether they're getting elected to local office, or they're serving in appointed office, or they're a resident just taking some interest in their community, sharing resources and articles. And so that is how we as an organization are established, sort of to broadcast a message widely, to share new ideas, new ways of approaching thorny challenges and persistent needs that we face. But within that setting, our local conversations program really does serve as we have a full-time community builder, as well as a couple of other staff that basically try to provide like different guiding resources, materials to help local leaders who are just regular people. I was one of them back in 2022 or 2021 when we started Delpop. And what we always suggest to groups is, hey, like you can use an educational tool. We often suggest a format of something similar to what you've done, which is like have updates on what's taking place in your community. For us, it's often like, here are some big housing projects that are coming forward that we can support because we would love to see these things happen. Here's a policy change to the secondary suites guidelines for the city of Delta. And oh, by the way, like this is also something that's exciting happening in Surrey, or a good idea from over here. And then we try to take some time for an educational activity. So that can be watching a video together and discussing it. That can be just having a conversation on a theme. We've had grad students that I've asked to analyze the city of Delta's housing needs policy, or housing needs analysis that we had done, as well as our housing strategy that was released afterwards. And what what should we be seeing? How do you help me to see what I should be seeing in a document like that? And so that was really valuable. And so Strong Towns broadly, I mean, at strongtowns.org, there's so many resources that are available just to help equip individual activists as well as groups. But we then encourage groups, and First Things First, I think, has a lot of, is following a very, a well-trodden path of saying, hey, we meet together, we mobilize together, we connect with more people. And sometimes it's perhaps Lori, and for Margaret and others, and Sue as well, it's just that reminder, hey, it's worth doing. There's those days when you feel that deep sense of like discouragement, things, a setback, and it's like, no, this is not just for now. This is for a long time. As a proto time traveler, we're tweaking those things that actually have that long runway when the fruits of that will have been revealed. And yeah, just the thought of tracing that out and being like, wow, we actually did make a difference, as a really powerful motivator as well. So I hope that answers the question from the chat, if I got that right. Bruce, can you put some infectious enthusiasm in a bottle? Yes, I check out my Etsy store. It'll cost you a penny though.
We have another question. There's a saying that half the people in the world don't want anything to change, and the other half want everything to change. Do you have any resources in Strong Towns to figure out how to have difficult conversations without becoming antagonistic?
Yes. The closest that we've come to being antagonistic is we hosted a 1-hour virtual web session on how to talk to a NIMBY, a person who is not, declaring not in my backyard. But we really we have our course on mobilizing your community to become a strong town actually goes into quite a bit on like how to not antagonize individuals, but instead, particularly those that are resistant, because there's a core reason why their resistance emerges out of a shared observation. The observation, there's too much traffic. So what's the solution? No more housing. Oh, no, I think that we can come up, I don't feel safe in a downtown area, or I feel, unwelcome in certain spaces. Sometimes those observations emerge out of they emerge out of genuine experiences. And yet the solution and even the framing of it is often really skewed or presented in ways that just feel either callous or selfish, or are things that you're like, no, that's actually like based on improper factual basis. Along the way, to describe someone as wanting no change is actually not the case in anyone's life. We know that everyone is adapting to changes in different ways. One of the things I think that has really helped our group in Delta to really frame our focus is to say, like, we know that our neighborhoods are changing. Like, that is just the given. We're living in remarkable times where, I mean, just the coursing of money through the system, through, new development, all of these things that happen. We know that our neighborhoods are changing. So then we have to choose. Do we want our neighborhoods to become more exclusive and expensive, or to become more inclusive and diverse? Exclusive and expensive means you maintain your really rigid suburban style housing standards. You know, require everyone to have a garage in the front of their home, and you know, maybe have two garages, so that way like you keep your exclusive sort of like status. You maintain neighborhoods built all at once to a finished state, and you don't let anybody new in. No renters, no Airbnbs, nothing else. The challenge is your kids can't afford to live there. The challenge is that you actually, when you were that age, would not have been able to live there. And so the whole idea that like people can like pull up the drawbridge, when you begin to find like, well, how has this changed? That is definitely still happening when homes cost $100,000 compared to when they cost $1.4 million in Delta, which I don't know why I live in Delta. I should move to Penticton, although it's not that much better there. But in that context, when you say, look, in that setting, so much has changed. So let's talk about what the impacts of that are. Let's talk about what that looks like. And when someone says, you know, I finally feel more financially secure because my home value has increased so dramatically, I can feel financially secure. And I'm really worried that you're going to harm that with the introduction of multifamily housing in my neighborhood. To say, one, let's talk facts. The introduction of more density within your neighborhood almost invariably, and certainly within British Columbia, because of our setting, does not drop property values, it increases it. It also adds greater capacity. One of the other things that has been really compelling is, particularly as people begin to age, they begin to give thought to where are you going next? And the question of can you afford to stay in your own home is one that many people are able to say, actually, I think I can. But do you want to stay in your own home as it currently is, even though it's not fit to your purpose, particularly if someone loses a spouse, now all of a sudden they're a single person in a large house, and to say, what would it look like if you were actually allowed to build an efficiency unit or a second sort of apartment that you could use as your own space? And I know if I shared an article in the links page that I share with you. I wrote an article about a loophole allowed me to flourish in Delta. And it was a member of Delpop, and she's a retired land economist. She owned a large home. She didn't have a spouse any longer, and her niece couldn't find a place to live in the Lower Mainland for anything close to what she was making. And so she said, hey, I will allow you, I'll sell you 50% of my property, and I will construct a secondary dwelling on our property. Her niece lives in the main house. She lives in the secondary structure. She's basically taken so much value from it. And she said, in doing so, she could talk to the neighbors. And once they realized what she was doing, she wasn't like blowing up the whole of the whole lot and throwing up a tower or anything like that. They were like, oh, I wish we could do that. And there was this really weird thing with the way that her foundation was laid out, that she was allowed to do it because they had over poured a bit of concrete, and they're like, technically it's still attached, so you can do it, but nobody else can. But it was one of those like really silly things in our zoning bylaws that allowed her to actually be able to do this. And the neighbors were like, well, that is what I want. And so I think an element of saying, what is it that you do desire? You know, transportation options. Do you ever feel like you'd rather be able to maneuver within your neighborhood with a little less worry that you might get clipped by a vehicle? Do you ever, you know, want to just explore where you happen to live? Some of those things can begin to rewrite the challenges that people have when they see yet another bike lane going in, or are concerned that, you know, my money's just being wasted. I always say too, with bike lanes, and I'll go on to come back to another question, but with bike lanes, if somebody, you know, perhaps you can picture an archetype in your mind or a stereotype in your mind. Somebody goes to Home Depot, buys an extension cord. He said, hey, does that extension cord have power in it? And they're like, no, it's not plugged in. And it's not plugged in, and therefore it's not doing anything. But the moment it's plugged in at one source and connected to the thing that you want it to do at the other end, all of a sudden that thing has value. And bike lanes are exactly the same way. They can look silly for a while. They can, in a sense, appear powerless if they're not connected at front and end. And yet, once they are, it can have amazing impacts. In the city of Medicine Hat, where we were working, they put a protected bike lane out front of their high school. Great thing to do. But they didn't have yet the budget, and they weren't yet ready to do anything more. And so it was the community laughing stock. But I said, every one of you that's laughing has an extension cord in your garage. And it's doing the exact same. It's a connecting tissue that eventually will have value. And until it's fully implemented. And so trying to find those types of things, I think really helps. Another way to frame it is, what is the financial return on what you are contending for versus what is the financial return on modest improvements within neighborhoods. Bike lanes more than pay for themselves. Local businesses that really are fearful of losing one parking space or 3 parking spaces in time. If you go to Idaho, it's either Colorado Springs, Idaho, or Idaho Springs, Colorado. I always mix it up. Their whole downtown was really struggling. They said all of the crossroads, we're going to close them to cars. We're just going to make them pedestrianized. And it's kind of like a hillbilly, well, not hillbilly town, but like cowboy town, a bit of tourism, but a lot of local businesses. At first, everybody was like, what are you doing? They just closed the parallel streets. There's still connectivity. Now it's a gem. It's a place. We had somebody that sent me pictures, and I was like, "That looks amazing," because all of a sudden they've reclaimed some of this space, and the very people that were so opposed to it, who didn't want the change, even though they were accepting other types of changes in their community, then became really compelled. Like, "Oh, this is worth doing," and now are beginning to be quite okay to be in the pictures when somebody's like, "Hey, this looks awesome. Can we take a picture of this?" So, yeah. Sorry, that's a long share pics. Yes, I will
That's
try to
okay.
find.
You've given us lots of great ideas, and actually, there's a couple of elected officials that are in on the meeting this evening, and
Awesome.
they've given us some resources for having neighborhood parties and community parties. There's United Way Community Foundation. So people, if you're all fired up by Norm's talk, there might be some resources out there for you to getting your group going. I think we've more or less answered questions in the chat. People are also talking about their own concerns and resources. I think I will hand it over to Sue to sort of wrap up the evening.
That was great, Norm. Thank you so much. So inspiring and such a positive message. Just a couple of things for everyone to know. We will be sending out a recording of this talk, and along with it, any of the links that have been put in the chat. So you don't have to worry about saving the chat if you don't want to. Our next deep dive we're still working on. So if you just check our website or sign up for our monthly newsletter, if you haven't already, and you can see closer to the time what our next deep dive will be. For those of you who are living in the Penticton area, first things first, it's going to be having an event on Saturday, February 17th in the afternoon. That's from 1 till 3. And this is an event to thank our volunteers and members for their support. And it's also an opportunity for anyone else to come and drop by and learn more about our organization. So anyone is welcome. We're going to have light snacks, games, prizes, and raffle tickets. So bring a bit of cash if you're coming. And I think Lori just popped a poster up there, but we'll also include that information when we send out the email in the next day or two. And just one last announcement that's quite important. There's a group in Nanaimo, the Nanaimo Climate Hub, who's been doing research into the cost of heat pumps and has found that in many cases the prices are higher than they should be. So they've put together a petition that's asking the government to require transparent pricing to try and prevent this inflation of prices. So if you'd like to sign the petition or learn more about it, again, Lori will put a link in the newsletter, and we encourage you to take a look at that and participate if you can.